Hello, everyone, and welcome to Hala-Days Episode 3. Today we're going to be talking about value in Hala, and depending on what I titled the video, maybe the lack thereof. I've been talking about this episode in the previous two, and it has taken a lot more work to get it figured out than I thought it might. That's because we're dealing on topics that I don't fully understand on the level such as a calling winner or a Pro Tour Top 8 competitor might. You know, this isn't Michael Hamilton or Paul Van Hysel explaining this concept to you. So I'd say before we begin, I'd like to say that all of this is filtered through my understanding and also my ability in the game in Flesh and Blood, which is, I'm not a slouch, so I got that going for me. On the same token, I'd like to say that I won't be as reductive as last video, but watching last video will help, I think, in the understanding of this video. It's a long video, and it's going back to the extreme basics, but what I'm talking about there has helped me understand what I'm talking about here. But that being said, if you have any qualms with the analysis given in this video, you can leave a comment or talk to me on the Purple Discord in the Hala chat. Really, I'm just trying to lay the groundwork in the previous video so we can talk about the concepts in this video, but it's not required watching at all. As well, before we begin, I'd like to say that we need to have a few baseline understandings of concepts before discussing value. Things like evaluating cards and valuing a turn cycle are most notable, especially when it comes to the examples I'll give later. I'm sure there's a lot of resources for this. The ones that I have watched and found helpful are Team Covenant's Fab Foundations, I think is what it's called, videos. They discuss the basic concept of value. And these are a few years old. I think they're 4 years old, actually, at this point. So the design game plan from LSS has turned tail a little bit, but I think it's still helpful. And then Nathan Crawford also has a few videos called Learning Curve, which he also discusses stuff. So you can find both of those videos, and if you watch them and then come back to this video, it might make more sense if you're newer. But it's also good to have a refresher. I was watching some of the videos recently and was like, oh man, I kind of forgot about this aspect. So without further ado, let's begin. Oh wait, before we begin, I'd like to say I'm trying a new editing style with this video. As you can see, I'm pretty prominently featured in the frame right now. Let me know if you like this style instead. My last video was almost like I recorded a lecture and uploaded it to Canvas or something like that. And I'm trying to try different things, so let me know. So now, without further ado, let's begin. So to harken back to the last video, when considering any card with Hala, if you're running Zenith Blade and 9 copies of Edict of Steel, then we must first understand what the effect of Edict of Steel does, which is create a Flurry token. The Flurry token is the entire lens through which I think anyone has to evaluate every card in the deck right now. Again, if they're running Zenith Blade and if they're playing Hala. And why is that? It's very easy to understand the value of a Zenith Blade activation, I think, because there's only 4 base modes of attack. And I'll show you what I mean by that right now. So before I start this, I'll just say all of these are assumed to be at the minimum cost to the pilot, and also we're assuming without access to equipment. So, of course, there is 1 for 3 with no go again. That's the base. It says on the card, 1 resource, 3 attack, once per turn, right? Then there are 3 more modes depending on what happens throughout the game, right? So 1 resource with a card out of deck, or 4 resources if you pitch to Hala's ability, 4/4 with go again. This assumes that that card out of the deck sharpens and also did not reduce the cost or did not create a Flurry token, right? That you can pay 1 card out of your deck, send it to the graveyard to sharpen, say a blue Indefensibly Honed. You're just using that to sharpen it. And then you're pitching 1, or you're paying 4 to sharpen with Hala's hero ability and then paying 1, and then you get a sword with 4 go again. Next, there is 1 for 4 with a card out of deck with go again and a Flurry token. This is going to assume, again, that it's the minimum cost, which would be a red Edict of Steel, or that we already had a Flurry token and we just played 1 card to sharpen it. right? So that it's the same thing, 1 resource or 4 resource. 1 resource, obviously, you'd lose a card, and then you'd get go again and a Flurry token, right? Then, of course, there is 1 for 3 with no go again and a Flurry token being used when you activate the Zenith Blade, which you lost a card out of deck to create that Flurry token, right? So you're netting negative on that last one. So if we analyze all of these modes, I'd say it's easy to evaluate because we know the best possible attacks, which is the ones with go again and either with or without a Flurry token. The middling one is 1 for 3, right? I mean, ultimately, especially at the end of the game, you'd be trading a card for a card, but your card would go back into your deck, right? And then lastly, and again, worsely, the 4th option, which is 1 for 3 with no go again and a Flurry token. So why is that last one the worst one? Because the value of the Flurry token and its effect on the evaluation of the other cards in the deck. But I guess the question of this video will be, how does one evaluate the capacity to do something? I have to refrain from using the word ability because obviously that has implications in Flesh and Blood. So I'm going to be referring to that aspect of playing the game as capacity. And what I mean is that it's easy to evaluate a card like Command and Conquer as it is resolving, because you can clearly see how many resources you spent to play the card and also how many cards it demanded from the opponent. So if they block it out, it's 2 cards minimum. If they don't block it, then and they have an arsenal, then you take a card from them. So you're trading a card for a card, right? These are different ways to evaluate a card, and also obviously the assigned number value it has on the attack. But what does a Flurry token do that makes it hard to evaluate? Well, it says when you activate a weapon you control, you may attack with that weapon twice this turn. Both of those words, activate and twice, are essential to understanding the Flurry token. First of all, it means you cannot stack these tokens, primarily because you can never have more than 1 second attack each turn, right? I presume, I mean, I'm not going to, say I know what's going on in LSS headquarters, but I can see a definite realm in which someone stacked a bunch of tokens that said you may attack with it an additional time this turn, played something like Sharpened Senses and a Brimming Blade or whatever, and just went boom, 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 like a machine gun. So it's very carefully worded to say second time, right? Because you can only attack a second time 1 time. It also means that the keywords that they're printing on cards with Beck and Steel and again, that keyword of attack does not trigger an activated ability of a sword you control because you did not activate that sword. You attacked with it, but you did not activate the ability. So that's also an interesting thing. It's not as important as the second attack one, but it's something to think about. This is Ethan from the future. I forgot to say this. Essentially, because you can only attack a second time, and because of the way we can generate Flurry, there's no way that we can create it outside of putting cards into our graveyard, right? So that essentially means we never want to have more than 1 Flurry token or we lose value, right? Okay, back to Ethan from the past. So with that being said, how does one actually evaluate the concept of this on a turn-to-turn basis? I think it's easier to show you rather than tell you what I mean, so let's do that. And also, before I show you, a couple of house rules. So essentially, the fun part of Flesh and Blood is that there is endless branching possibilities, not only in your own deck, but you're also playing against another hero and another person who makes decisions that you have to respond to, right? So this is all idealized and this is all theoretical anyway, but again, we're having to assume a lot of things, right? In almost all of these examples, I'm assuming we have no access to resources or resource creation with chest equipments, i.e. Grains of Blood Spill, Tunic, or Paragon Plate, and that we have all the tempo at the beginning of the turn, right? So that we didn't have to block on the previous turn, maybe that we made them block their whole hand because it's near the end of the game, right? Whatever it is, we have 4 cards that we've just drawn, and we have no access to resources other than the cards that we can pitch to do so. So I'm going to start with an unscripted example first. The rest of this I have very carefully thought out, but this one I would say, for example, is a hot topic in the Hala Discord, especially in the way that it is involving sharp incline. That if you had a Flurry token or you had a way to create a Flurry token with sharp incline in your hand, and that's only the 2 cards that you have, that without access to resources, for example, this card is unplayable and you'd have to rework the way you are thinking about this hand. But if you do have access to a Flurry token, everything is a lot different, right? And so basically what I'm saying is we have to completely think about almost every card in the deck differently, because we have formed our deck entirely around the idea that we want to create Flurry tokens. And since we want to create Flurry tokens, this is me going back in time. So let us say that we drew this hand, which is a Brimming Blade, a yellow Edict of Steel, and 2 blue cards. Let's say 1 Beckon Steel and 1 Indefensibly Honed. The reason I think this hero makes this just really difficult to evaluate and also theorize about is because every angle of approach with this hand has some sort of mirror in the way that we must assume 2 modes of attack. First is that we do have a Flurry token, and obviously second is that we do not. In the current versions of the deck, it is constructed in such a way that we can end our turn with Flurry tokens, so there is a possibility that we could have a Flurry token, or that we start our turn with a Flurry token just in general, right? So the best way to explain this is to evaluate the hand both ways. Before we begin that, I want to reiterate that I'm assuming we have full tempo, and I'm assuming that we didn't have to block with any cards, and I'm going to assume that we have no equipment. I'm assuming we're at a part of the game that, blocking with it allowed us to play this hand, right? Which would mean that we have no access to additional resources, such as Grain Plate or Tunic. So what does this look like if we have no Flurry token? I think the obvious answer would be to play Brimming Blade to allow us to sharpen more than once, and it does it more efficiently because it's only paying 1 resource to sharpen twice instead of 3 to sharpen once with her hero ability, right? And that we're playing Edict of Steel so as to create a Flurry token, which is our only way to do that in this hand, and then we want to decide which blue we want to play or keep behind. Realistically, if your opponent allows it and you play Beckon Steel on the first swing, you would create a counter on the sword and swing for 7, and then on your final 3rd swing, you would swing for 7 again. So to break down the math of that, you're paying 3 resources, 1 for Brimming Blade, 1 for the first activated ability of Zenith Blade, which is the attack, and then the 3rd resource for the 2nd attack. And this all translates to obviously 3 on the Zenith Blade, 3 counters, and then 2 swings, which is 12 damage. So you're paying 3 cards for 12, which, if you know what I'm about to say, you'd say that's 1 card less than a typical head jab turn of 4 head jabs, right? That ultimately, you're paying 3 cards, but 1 goes back in your deck for 12 damage, which is extremely overrate in terms of the bare minimum, obviously. And we have the potential to also use that 4th card to add a lot more damage. We'd end up adding 8 total damage, like I alluded to. 7 plus 7 plus 6 ends up being 20 damage with 4 cards, and 1 of them going back in the deck, if we allowed that to happen. Or, since this is a yellow Edict of Steel, you could pay into the hero ability and then play Edict of Steel. You could then pitch a blue card to swing twice, which would be a 3-card 10, and 2 of them going back into your deck. And you could leave Brimming Blade for the arsenal. In the previous example, you could also just save Beckon Steel for perhaps if you want to use an attack reaction to make sure it hits, right? But that would go into the arsenal, right? So in theory, both of these are demanding enough cards that we are paying only 2 cards in the first example. In the second example, we're only paying 1 card out of our deck for enough damage that they would need to block their hand with their entire hand, assuming all of their cards block for 3, that we are only paying 1 to 2 cards to get at least 3 to 4 cards out of their hand, right? So this is extremely overrate in terms of deck damage. On top of that, it allows us to, if they say no blocks, right? 10 or 12 is either 1/4 or over 1/4 of their health if they don't block it, right? So you're pumping out damage and also demanding that they block out the damage if they don't want to lose their life, right? On top of that, you would be setting up, right, with either Brimming Blade or Indefensibly Honed or Beck and Steel. It's all contextual. You could also just dump the entire hand and play Indefensibly Honed, right, which ends up being 4 cards, 3 out of your deck for 14, with the implied value that if they block anything on the first swing of 7, that they would also take damage, right? So there's a lot more implied value to that card in particular, but 4-card 14 is 2 points above rate in terms of playing 4 cards, right? So we're seeing, but actually, you just watched me have the revelation that 4 cards does not follow the path of 3 cards. Meaning that if you pay 3 cards, that's 4 resources for the 3 cards you expelled. But for 4 cards, it is under 4. Huh. At any rate, this is extremely good for a warrior. Especially one that you have to meet only one quote-unquote quest, and it's on the yellow card. Maybe I'll come back to that idea later. So if we had a Flurry token with this hand, I'd almost assuredly every time I'm playing, how I would play it anyway, Brimming Blade, because I'm just needing to sharpen and I'm wanting to put out as much damage as I can. And I'm pitching to Hollow's Hero ability as well. And then I'm swinging twice for a 3-card 12. Except, with having a Flurry token already, I am pitching 2 blues and swinging for 12 just the same, right? And I'm getting to set Edict of Steel into my arsenal, which I would argue is probably the best arsenal out of all of those because it guarantees we'll swing twice next turn. I guess I could see in a world in which I would try to make Beck and Steel happen, but that's a way riskier play. And what I'm just trying to do is be consistent here. Realistically, what I've demonstrated here is the value of having a Flurry token versus not having a Flurry token at the start. This is not, however, the value of the Flurry token, because essentially what I've shown is that if you started a turn with the Flurry token, you make the card up that you expended to create that Flurry token. This is not, however, the value of a Flurry token, because what the Flurry token does really is allows you to swing an additional time from anywhere between 3 and realistically, you could go up to 7 comfortably. But, depending on attack reactions, things get really different in terms of mathematical calculations, right? So realistically, how are you going to assign the value of what a Flurry token does, right? That if we had a different hand, say we didn't have the ability to create a Flurry token with the yellow Edict of Steel, and say we had a different card that did not, maybe it was another pump, right? Instead of an attack reaction. We cannot evaluate that hand in the same way at all, right? Because the capacity to swing twice is so much more powerful than not even having the ability to create it. So let us look at a different example then. So let's say that, again, assuming we had full tempo, we drew up this hand, which is 2 Brimming Blades, a Sharp Incline, and let's say, for example, that in this deck you would be running a blue Display of Craftsmanship, okay? Obviously, this hand, which has no Flurry generation, is going to be much, 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 much worse. If we do have access, however, to a Flurry token, this becomes actually a really incredible hand because you can play both Brimming Blades, Sharp Incline, and then have 1 resource left over to activate your second swing for free, right? But without it, I draw this up, especially if I had full tempo, I guess what I would do here is, I guess realistically what I'm doing here is I'm pitching into Hala's ability. I'm paying for Brimming Blade with Brimming Blade maybe, and then playing Sharp Incline. Again, this is assuming I have full tempo and I can't block with these cards, because if I drew up these cards, I'm blocking with at least 2 of these cards at the bare minimum. So I don't know. This is a really tough one to think about. But so it's like, you know, if you get, let's say you blocked with 2 of these cards, that's 6 value out of 2, and then you swung for 3 and set Brimming Blade and hope that the next turn you had something good, right? But with the Flurry token, obviously this becomes 4. So 1 for 4 because you're going to swing twice. 1 for 4 because you're going to swing twice. So that's 2 Brimming Blades. So you're paying 2 for 8 damage. Paying 2 cards out of your deck for 8 damage. Then you're playing Sharp and Steel. Or, sorry, Sharp Incline. Which then adds another damage on top of that. So we were at 7, now we're at 8. And then we're swinging for free on the first swing. So 8, go again, swing again to 8, right? That's a 4 card 16 with 3 cards out of the deck, which is, you know, Aurora 1 levels of 4 go again, 4 go again, 4 go again, 4 go again, right? Now, hold on, because this is editing Ethan much later in the day, trying to get this video out on time. What this version of Ethan is failing to consider is that, as he said earlier in the video, all Flurry generation comes from a card. So realistically, there is no such thing as a blank card anything if you are not counting the Flurry as one of those cards, because you can only put a card in your graveyard to make a Flurry token. Yeah, so again, to reiterate also here that the reason we're not talking about equipment here is because equipment also changes how I view this last example here dramatically differently as well. Say I had access to a Tunic resource, right? It doesn't change how I'm going to play if I have a Flurry token already, but it would drastically change how I played if I didn't have a Flurry token. For example, I would take the Tunic resource, play 1 Brimming Blade, play Sharp Incline, pitch to Hala's hero ability, and then swing the sword for free for 6, I believe is what it would be. No, it'd be for 7. So that would make that hand at least somewhat playable, right? But again, it just throws too many, I guess, spanners in the works, as it were, to really evaluate the raw damage of the cards or the raw value of the cards. So, I mean, ultimately, when you talk about equipment, the value just goes up, but it also goes sideways and backwards a little bit, depending on what equipment you're running. And the way I play all of the hands I talked about is it just changes so dramatically, it's not even worth putting in the video, because it would take too much time, I think, to explain. Additionally, I'd be remiss to fail mentioning that into a deck that you can run Valiant Dynamo into, that each Flurry token evaluation goes up +1 if you had the -1 counter on your boots, right? Because you get to reset it, you have the capacity to reset it. Which is ultimately my conclusion, is that the value of the Flurry token is stretching my ability to evaluate the deck so much so that I am having a hard time even wanting to, for example, think of possible lines. And the value on a turn-to-turn basis is much more important than throughout the game while you're playing it. It becomes obvious at the end of the game upon reflection, right? But on a turn-to-turn basis, you're wanting to play each Edict of Steel. And it's like, again, it's all so contextual that it's like, what color of Edict of Steel did I draw? Like, do I have a Brimming Blade available to me to even play the blue one in a way that is efficient and powerful? Do I have, something like Beck and Steel, which could allow me to sharpen and, end up swinging a 3rd time? Do I have, let's say, Swordmaster Shine, which allows me to benefit off of using? Do I have access to resources? Do I have, right? So I just think that thinking through these lines is maybe more contextual than any certain hero definitely pre-Rosetta, probably, right? That I think it is the perfect example of the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, more so than any hero released in the last 3 years, probably, because it's not so much about math, the raw numbers of math anymore. For example, especially when you're trying to fulfill a quest of getting sharpening counters, or +1 counters, I should say, that, like, you know, Beck and Steel becomes one of the strongest blues in the game because you're paying 0 resources out of a blue card for 7 attack minimum, or I guess 6 attack is the minimum. So it's difficult to, I guess, square away the value of a Flurry token, and thusly, I guess, the value of the entire deck, which is ultimately my conclusion, is that to discuss value is kind of a fool's errand, because you have to, in good faith, you know, be on the same page with the person you're talking to. It is like, what equipments do I have access to? What cards are in my hand? What, like, did I create a Flurry token, let's say, off of Toe the Line? Did I? Ultimately, this is a lot shorter video than I intended it to be, partly because there will be a second part in discussing Paragon Plate in the next episode. But that the things these topics are coming to are things that I'm not fully settled on yet, and I guess I have time to think about them. But this is kind of what I wanted to discuss this week. I'd be happy to hear everyone's thoughts about this examination. Perhaps you think I'm right, or perhaps you think I'm wrong. I would say that there is no numerical value you can assign to the capacity to attack a second time, right? It's like saying that drawing a card has a certain value. People would agree that the minimum is 3, and that you would construct your deck that the minimum would be 3, but that ultimately on decks that are drawing cards, right, that they are trying to maximize their value to be greater than 3. At the bare minimum, they want it to be 4. So I don't know. It's very difficult. It's a hard thing to discuss. Even in my example hands, there's so many assumptions that you have to make to be able to even describe value that it's hard to say. Not to mention you're playing against another human being who has a hero that perhaps could do things to you on your turn. I don't know. So let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching. Hopefully I don't have to come back to record more parts of this. Thank you.